Sorry for the delay in getting this posted. I just wanted to use this time to review the eMoney software we'll be using and go over some of the basics of the tool to help you guys better understand it as we progress through the semester and begin integrating this into our class. I will share the screen now to give you an example of a sample client that we'll be using, just to go over some of the basics, functions, and features of this tool. Okay, so right here we see Frank and Joanna Miller. They have a net worth of 1.938 million and investments of 1.238 million. This tells me they either have a business or some property that is outside of their investments, which increases their net worth. We can also see here that they have about 57% in equities. We can also see that they have about 31% in fixed income, about 8.5% in other, and about 2% in cash. Next, we can see that in this plan, the assets under management are around $350,000 with the life insurance as well as the investments. And then a series of investments that belong to the client but are held away, meaning they're not under our advisement. And that includes a 529 plan. As you guys may know, 529 plans are really similar from a tax standpoint to an IRA account, but their only benefit is for education purposes, and they actually belong, to you, and they can only be used to fund education. Then we also see that they have a cash emergency fund, very common. Someone has a checking account. I'm not going to manage that. We also see that they have a 401k. Good point of introduction here. 401k generally cannot be managed by a third party. It's generally the relationship is between the employer and the government. And then you also see the 403b. Similar rules apply there. With a 403b, really similar to a 401k, those are pre-tax contributions for retirement. And then you also see Joanna's Roth that she's converted with 103,000. Now, what strikes me here from a business perspective is why aren't we managing Joanna's Roth? Some of these other ones we can't manage, like the 529s, the 401ks, and the 403bs, but why aren't we managing that Roth? And again, this is a sample client. I frequently use these tabs here. The facts is where I'll do a lot of inputting. Luckily, in these examples with Frank and Joanna Miller, all this has been entered, but you can go and click in here, see a variety of options that you can list. I rarely put the person's occupation. You can also see children, extended family, including grandchildren, and you can add a whole variety of context to their profile here. So there's a nice information bank. Next, financial priorities. I find this tab to be useless. It's really for, adding quick notes like what are their priorities, retirement planning, saving for college, some of the stuff, minimizing taxes. I mean, that's a priority for everyone. Why even list it, right? But there are some things you might want to make note here, just a useful note tool, right? Next, goals. This is one of the most important tabs because it will determine many of the outputs. For example, their retirement spending. That's what I call their lifestyle goal. How much they want to have confidence in that they can spend a year that's also adjusted for inflation. Then on top of spending 135K a year in today's terms, right, adjusted for inflation, we see that we have a plan for Mary Beth, 50 grand a year for college, and then 50 grand a year for college for Lucas, and leaving no money to heirs. I generally will leave no money to heirs because it helps me back into an equation. For example, I don't want to, unless there's a child that has need, I don't want to really aggregate money aside for them yet. We see what we have at the end and then we divide it up. You can also add other goals, want to buy home improvement, travel, other, any kind of financial goal. Now, some people might say, well, what about like a car purchase? I include the car purchase inside of that spend for 135, right? Servicing debt is separate from retirement spending, from lifestyle spending, I should say. That is aggregated in net worth under mortgages, right? And it's paid above and beyond their lifestyle spending. Why? Because your mortgage technically eventually ends while your lifestyle spending does not. So the mortgage component and debt servicing is broken out in net worth and is not considered part of their financial goals, at least here. Net worth, we see a variety of accounts here. Everything with a lot of it we already went over. We see that home worth $850,000. We can click on that, and we can see that it's growing at 1.75% going forward. You can set a variety of growth rates, but we're obviously going to leave that at about 2% for reasonability purposes. We see that they have $3,000 on a credit card, and we also see mortgage on the home, $426. We can click into that mortgage. It gives us the basic information of the mortgage, how many years are left, the original value, current balance. You can go in this advanced tab here and get significantly greater detail, estimated payment, things of that nature. Going back to facts. You can also use this tool to add new information, new taxable investment account, new qualified retirement. That's an IRA, 401k. Then you also have Roth, health savings account, stock options, annuities, deferred compensation. You could have a pension plan, it's part of your net worth, but you might not get it for a series, until a period in the future. Real estate, personal property, business, notes receivable, mortgage, regular loan, any kind of asset, you can pretty much input that here as part of their financial plan. Income, $300,000 a year right now, Frank's earning. And the wife is earning $50,000 a year part-time. We also see their Social Security, which is money we have them pegged at getting at 65. And then we see a pension fund, a pension, where he'll get $12,000 a year. And that can also be added here is other income, right? Deferred income, or immediate annuity. There is some optionality here because you do have the ability to add that deferred income, but you also have the ability to have deferred compensation here as part of net worth. So there's more than one way to skin a cat when it comes to inputting information. You can also break out the living expenses, current, in retirement, advanced age, and after someone passes away. And so there's not much, variability here. But, if I wanted to say advanced age, goes up to 140, maybe it drops to 125. And then after Frank passes away, 115, right? The big debate on how to handle healthcare costs later in life, like how do you model for those? The way I model for them now is pretty simplistic, but it works. Is I assume that for the most part, entertainment spending transfers into healthcare spending. So less filet mignons and more nurses' aides, right? This is a breakout of their expenses. So where we have the mortgage and the credit card on the other tab, it's annualizing what we would expect the payments would be for this year, including this year's college tuition for the kids, the insurance premiums. We noticed he had a bunch of insurance. I'm not a big insurance fan. We also can set the state taxes, or if there's local taxes, and then federal taxes are already built in. Savings and contributions. So, this pre-allocates assets to go somewhere, right? So when they have a spend and they have an income, the spending and income equals, what's left over. This savings page explicitly assigns excess allocation. So, for example, we're showing it going into your 401k. It's going into their current 401k or the 403b. What are the percentages? Does the employer match? And what does that look like? Asset allocation. I don't spend too much time in this tab. We can also look at protection as it's talking about their life insurance. Right away. How much is their long-term care insurance? That's like something to highlight. They're paying $6,000 a year for long-term care. It's not terrible, but would they be better off banking that money and investing it as opposed to paying for that insurance? We see that they're retiring, in 2032, so retirement's coming up. Now we're going to go into the plans page. This is based on the current plan. No changes are made. Everything we just saw and reviewed, keeping that spending, 140, and then spending drops down to 115. When when the first person passes away, and we can see here that they're not sustainable, right? 18% probability of success. What's their primary goal? Is that annual spending rate? Why is that goal unachievable? Well, let's look. Let's go back to the plans and we can dive in to the decision center. And the good thing about planning is there's only a couple. If you have the numbers right, there's only a couple answers, right? Spend less, work longer, right? Or liquidate assets, right? We see here, that Frank here has, so all these buttons we can set up. So I'll start there. These buttons are pre-built here, but they can all be customized. So I can go to modify and I can add income, modify the home. That's code for downsize, change stock options, change the portfolio return. That is good, but it's tricky, right? Because you don't want to make someone feel like they're doing good by giving them high returns. I use the rebalance the portfolio to say, well, let's say we do worse, right? Sell business, sell personal property, sell real estate. All the red here is outflows. So add expenses, right? Whether that's going to charity, buying a car, purchasing property, changing growth rates on the right. These are kind of like core assumptions, retirement ages, living expenses, tax rates, Social Security, and annual savings. Okay. So exiting out of that, we see the options they have here. In this little lifetime portfolio value chart, we see that their assets peak at around 64 and then rapidly decline, right? 85, they're out of money. So here's one: financially support mom for 8 years at $60K a year. What happens when we do that? Well, they can't afford to do that, so let's leave that off the table for now. What if Frank retires 3 years later, works till he's 68? That's going to improve the situation, right? But it still doesn't get him to the end, right? So we'll leave that on. Let's say he sells his vacation house. How much does he sell it for? Let's be more conservative. Let's say he doesn't get great money. Let's say he gets $275. Now, when we sell the vacation home, it also reduces property taxes and maintenance. Can he take care of mom now? Looks like it's possible, right? But they also want to take their own special vacations, right? If we're selling the vacation home, they want to take these fancy vacations every year until they're 75. Can they also do that? No. Hey guys, we have to have a come to God moment here. It's either you take the fancy vacation or you take care of mom. But, life's not always so binary. So we can go into this option right here. And let's set the vacations to 15,000. No, you know what? Let's set them to 10. And let's push the vacations back to 70. That's 75. I mean, I think you can go to Aruba every year, probably twice a year for like $5,000 for a couple. So, maybe, it's a conversation that they need to have. I just pivoted here into the Monte Carlo report. It shows the variability in the outcomes in terms of one of these flow charts showing the average scenario versus the bottom and top 20% scenario. I like the Monte Carlo summary the best because it just is a good visual. It almost gives you a grade that you wouldn't like to get in school. I'm going to modify this again, the vacation, and I'm going to say, hey, you know what, you guys, if you're taking care of mom, you can do a $5,000 a year vacation. Because guess what? The 68% outcome here isn't good. So you bring that spending down to additional $5,000 a year. Now they're at like barely passing in terms of the financial situation. What next? Well, I can tell them, the way the tool works is, it just looks at everything as outflows. So beyond your normal spending, you guys can spend, for the next 8 years, an extra $65,000 a year. And beyond that 8 years, only an extra $5,000 a year on these vacations. Now, the other option is that, be taking care of mom for $60K a year for 8 years is really generous. Maybe we have a conversation of making that something more reasonable, like $40K, just so you guys can compromise, right? Or even if it moved down to $50K, then you can afford vacations that are $15,000 a year. From this point, it's just math. And then how do we improve that situation? Are the numbers they are giving me, are they realistic? Should we adjust them? What I like about this one here is it shows the median outcome as opposed to the average. And it also shows basically a 2 standard deviation event on the top and bottom side. Basically, the downside is living through the Great Depression, the last 10 years of your life, and the upside is, living through the dot-com bubble, the last 10 years of your life. Both fairly unrealistic. I always focus on the median and then back on the lifetime portfolio tab to the average. So we see here is pretty suitable, right? You can also make a change here and say, let's make the financial support for 6 years, bring it down to 2029. Say, hey, we can help mom, but 8 years is a long time. When I say that, not meant to be callous. However, most people in need of tremendous amount of care don't last all that long, right? So, a lot of times people talk about long-term care insurance. And, I had one client who had like 5 years of coverage. And I'm like, dude, you're only going to live a year if you're in those kind of conditions. That's just how it works. So one of these kind of not easy conversations. And then we can also see here, before we made these changes, these optional scenarios, he had portfolio assets and a net worth of 3 million. And then after, he had portfolio assets of 2.8 million and a net worth of 4.2 million. What are we doing here? We're selling the house, we're freeing up assets. That's what's happening. We're finding ways to reduce spending based on the current plan, right? But there are some forced spending, like, he's not going to put his mom on the street. The other tab I use very frequently is the cash flow planning. The red line here is the spending. So let's look at in 2034. This is now where we have him retiring. The blue bar is the salary and bonus. Social Security is the darker blue bar. They also have some other income. And then it says their total funding and total expenses for that year, right? And remember, what you're seeing the spending here, 479. You're like, how did this happen? Well, they're looking to spend $140,000 a year. But to spend $140,000 a year, what do you need to earn? About 180, maybe 200, depending on the state you're in. And then they also have these excess expenses for the mother. These are inflation adjusted dollars. So we can go down here and see year by year the cash flows. So we see that, in this year, we're assuming he sold that house, gets the 275, the net savings. You see the net savings here in year 2. He's making more money than he needs. Then also, you also go down a few more years, and we see the total portfolio assets. These go up linearly, even though we know they can be volatile as soon as the static market returns go forward in the future. And then there's significant withdrawals needed in this period. What's happening between 2023 and 2029? Those damn student bills, right? The tuition payments that they have. It's going to be really burdensome for these folks. This might be a situation and say, hey, you know what? You got to take care of yourself first. You can give your kids $35K a year, and they can take, if anything more than that, they can take a loan out for 15 grand a year. That's not an unreasonable burden to put on someone at the end of school, especially if you're going somewhere that costs 30, if they're already going 35K. But, some people, life's full of trade-offs, right? They have a situation with the grandma. They have significant tuition bills. And, a desire to go on fancy vacations. And they just don't have the assets to do all of these things. This is an example, this isn't even uncommon where you see people, making, a few hundred grand a year, but the spending, while it's not out of control, like I said, you can go to Aruba for 1 week a year and probably spend less than 5 grand. Where are they going for these 30 grand a year vacations till they're 75? You might have to make sure it's more reasonable. Then, you see here in 2030, tuition payments are over. They're in savings mode again, right? So they have a few more years where they can save. And then 2035, stops working. He's 68, she's 67, and they need to withdraw about, 100 grand in addition to the Social Security that they're receiving to cover their taxes and everything else. So we see here that they have some other income. This is the pension fund. That's what the other income is. They have Social Security, and to fund the rest of their spending, they need to withdraw 96,000. Their total spending in 2035 is 175 grand a year, because it's that 125K we initially put in, but adjusted for inflation, 15 years worth of inflation, which, 2% a year, 15 years, about 30% more in terms of what things would cost. So, this would be the start of how I would look at a financial plan for someone going forward in the future. They have to they're forced to take money out of their retirement accounts. We see that in the future. They're forced to take out 100 grand a year out of their retirement accounts anyway once they turn 72. But the money they bring in is usually enough to fund their lifestyle. We see this insurance payoff here at the end. What happens there? If someone passes away at 100, the insurance premium kicks off under other income. So, that's a potential bonus for them, although it's not a good bonus because you're dead. But I'll leave this here for now. I thought this was a pretty decent introduction to the software that you guys can use to review. Watch this video. I'm going to be getting the invitations out to the tool, and probably back half of this week. Some of it's out of my control as I'm working with eMoney, and looking forward to seeing you guys later on this week. Have a great day.